The final of the Chessable Masters started today. World champion Magnus Carlsen faced Anish Giri. They've been throwing a few tart comments at each other online, and this was really highly anticipated. The 4 rapid games, well, Carlsen took the lead, but Giri struck back in the 4th and final rapid game. So they went into 2 blitz games. The first one was drawn. Carlsen just got away with it. So this is the second blitz game, and we saw real drama here right from the word go. Carlsen with the white pieces. It's a Nimzo Indian. Plays the Zamish variation, which actually at top levels is rather discredited. But for a blitz game, it's very sharp, and I know from my own experience how things can turn so quickly in this position. But here was the first real drama, because Carlsen disconnected at this moment. Of course, it's just a simple recapture, but his internet went down. He didn't get back online for about a minute and a half, and this is a blitz game. They start with 5 minutes, and Carlsen right at the start lost a minute and a half. Well, once he got back online, then he started just banging out the moves incredibly quickly. And it seemed actually to have more of a detrimental effect on the play of Giri than Carlsen. So let's just take you through these first few moves. So Giri has set up in the middle in the kind of traditional way. And here the knight comes to g3. Now, compared to the normal variation of the main lines, the Hübner variation of the Nimzo, this knight stands far more actively on g3 than the normal f3. So there's a chance you can hop into f5, for example. Now, it's still fine for black. Black should castle here, but instead Giri incredibly lashed out with h5. Well, if this pawn manages to advance again, that's fine, but Carlsen blocked straight away, and this highlights the problem for black. Let's see what the problem is. After e4, white can put that bishop on g5, and that's already very uncomfortable for black. And the knight stands well on g3 as well. Bishop g4. Now, Giri just came back again. I mean, it looks bizarre. Obviously, he wanted to close this diagonal, but to lose so much time, white already has such a pleasant position. Now, because this pin is really uncomfortable for black, Giri took a pragmatic decision to play queen c7. He allowed his structure to be damaged, but, well, at least, he can develop now and doesn't have to worry about knight f5. Still, Carlsen seized upon this weakness and opened up the f-file with pawn to f4. He just wants to get straight through. And, of course, he's looking at that h5 pawn as well, which he managed to capture. Now, this looks absolutely dreadful for Giri, but what he's doing is he's using that e5 square. So this is his big hope. He's going to try and blockade in the middle. Now, the king came to d8, so it's not as bad as it looks, because often the king will hide on c7. Rook takes f4, knight g6. Now, here is a crucial moment in the game, actually, because if this rook retreats, it's attacked by the knight, then rook takes pawn, and this queen will come over to e5. Actually, black gets pretty decent play there. But Carlsen recognised the danger instantly, and he simply didn't back down. He played queen f3. So he's prepared to give up that rook, because that will hold his position. The queen will find itself in a fantastic square, and he secures the knight as well. In fact, that's roughly what happened. Queen e7, h5 actually provokes Giri to take that. And now knight takes and queen takes. Now, if Giri sits there, then really white has a completely winning position. That knight, you can see, well, I'm gonna call it. It's an octopus knight. You can see it controls absolutely crucial squares, covers that pawn as well. G8 probably the most important square, and actually E8 as well, preventing black's major pieces from getting any counterplay down here, and white is just in complete control. You can just roll these pawns down the board. So Giri played queen e5. At least by exchanging queens, he can try and loosen white's hold over the position. But g4 anyway, that's to secure the knight on f6. But a5 and rook a6, Giri just hitting back here. So this is very clever. That rook needed to come into the game very quickly, and that's the way to do it. Now, the best move should be bishop e2 to secure that pawn, and white looks to have a good position. It's still been unclear, but well, Carlsen was obviously fearful of this rook coming in and simply played rook b1, which is understandable, and this still gives him a good position, but now it's not so clear. Giri quite correctly gave back the exchange, and rook takes h5. So the immediate danger has passed for Giri, but actually Carlsen still has a little something in this position. Rook b5. And now it's possible to round up that pawn, but white can take here, and white should still be better. But rook h3, I think understandably, Giri wants more. He wants to hassle that bishop. And here, I mean, it's incredibly impressive how both players played here. Here, it's a blitz game. You're having to move almost instantly. Bishop f1 looks like a natural move. Instead, bishop e2. Very clever, really prescient actually, because Carlsen understands that in a few moves' time, that bishop is going to bounce out to h5, and that's really painful. He'd spotted that just a few moves before. So already very difficult. I mean, looking at this with a computer, of course, it gives you a different perspective. The computer still thinks that black is okay if you find a few only moves, but really in practice this is so difficult. Giri played the most natural move, taking this pawn, and suddenly after rook a8, black is in massive trouble. This pin is so uncomfortable. King c7 played. You have to get out of that pin straight away. Let me just show you one particular variation. If rook takes c4, you take here, threat, bishop e6, and if king e7, it's king c7 rather, d6 check, and you win the rook. That's the kind of danger that black is in. So Giri correctly played king c7, but now d6 check. In fact, bishop f4, bishop takes pawn isn't good in this position. But Carlsen correctly played d6 check. So if king takes pawn, the bishop can be taken. So king d7, bishop takes f7 is good now. Rook check. Now you've got to be careful, because that if the king steps up here, then the rook will take that pawn with check after the check. And now, again, I mean, I thought it was amazing that Carlsen spotted what to do here, because it feels as though, bishop e6 is going to work. It doesn't. But the best move is king g3. This is superb, because after this move, he'd spotted that bishop h5 with the idea bishop g4 actually wins material here. But he had to get the right move. It's quite incredible. So both players were way down their clock, just playing with seconds left, and Carlsen wins material. Bishop g4 check. Well, sacking the exchange would be hopeless. Giri plays correctly. He gives up a piece instead. Bishop takes is correct because white needs to take that pawn. Bishop takes b7. So now, well, with best play, this should be winning for white, but it is still very tricky, and there were still a few adventures here. Carlsen pushed up the board with king g4. Mistake, he should have come back down with king f2 to actually just make sure those pawns were blockaded. But he went forward, and this gave Giri a chance. And here, Giri should have played king c5. Instead, in order to come into d4, and then it's still not so clear actually, but instead rook c1, and that allowed Carlsen to cut the king, and now it's much more difficult. Rook f4, bishop f3, rook here, rook d4, king f2. Now the king comes back. You can see that if Carlsen had gone there a few moves before, it would have saved so much trouble. Even here, c3 is still not so clear. But after this, rook d3, bishop e4. And now the king comes over and Carlsen has the situation under control, because the king and bishop can take care of the c-pawn. And now he's just got to be a little bit careful. And that was the final move of the game. That is super solid. The pawn is protected by the bishop, and obviously the king comes over and this pawn is going to drop. Easy win now for white. So Carlsen won that second blitz game and therefore won the first set. Now it's best of 3. They play the second set tomorrow, so Giri in a must-win situation. But tremendous first day with, you know, the players hitting out at each other, and pretty even contest actually. At least I would say Carlsen dominated the first 3 games, or had it under control, and Giri came right back. But amazing comeback from Carlsen in this second blitz game after the disconnect. Thanks very much for watching. There'll be more coming soon.